Good morning, everyone. My name is Malik Luckett, and I'm here to do my state formation presentation on ancient Egypt. So before I begin, I would like to ask you guys, what do you already know about ancient Egypt? Two people, please answer. I would not like to pick on people I know. So
They were ruled by pharaohs.
that's true, and I'm going to talk about that.
They have pyramids.
True. One more person.
They used hieroglyphics.
That is true. So all of those are true points, and we're going to see how those points, or if those points relate to the state formation of ancient Egypt. So before I begin, I would like to these were some of the questions that I used to sort of facilitate my research on finding out information about ancient Egypt and the state. So how did ancient Egypt come into being? That's essentially the point of the project. What social processes precede and contribute to ancient Egypt forming? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the rest of the questions, you can all find them. They were just sort of questions that I used to go about doing my research. So what is a state? A state is an organization, a specific kind of organization expressing a specific type of social order in society. I have another definition. It is also a collection of individual human beings connected by a complex system of relations. With that broader definition of a state, a lot of different things could be classified as a state. As Ms. Dunn tried to exemplify in class one day, this classroom could be a state, this campus could be a state, and so on and so on. So now that we know what a state is, what are we going to talk about? So this is my thesis statement. Essentially, the main points we're going to talk about are agriculture and organization in ancient Egypt, urbanization, well, sort of a pre-modern urbanization, and the acceptance of the divine right rule from the peoples of ancient Egypt. And without the contributions that I just stated, the state formation of ancient Egypt would have been much slower or non-existent. So before we get into that, I'm going to give you guys a brief history overview of what was going on in ancient Egypt during that time that kind of contributed to the state formation. So in 3500 BC, you have the earliest settlers of the Nile. In 3100 BC, you have hieroglyphics being used and Narmer unifying Upper and Lower Egypt. In 2700 BC, you have the first stone pyramid built. In 1900 BC, you have Egypt gaining control of Nubia. In 1600 BC, Amus unified the country. In 1100 BC, Upper and Lower Egypt split. And in 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. So all of that was going on during the time of ancient Egyptians. So now we're going to talk about the main points I listed. So agriculture and organization. As many of us know, ancient Egypt is well known for its landscape. When many of us think of Africa or ancient Egypt, we often think of the Nile River just because it's one of the main things about Africa that teachers teach us growing up, kind of one of the only things. So the Nile Valley region was perfect for agriculture and the land proved remarkably fertile. The Egyptians established an irrigation system which brought the rich alluvial mud of the Nile into the fields. Every year in the middle of July, the river rose above its banks and flooded the land. And then you have the crops that they produce and some other things. So essentially, like I said, the flooding of the Nile kind of led to the ancient Egyptians living in larger communities and no longer having to wander or search for food or hunt or gather or anything like that. So with that, I kind of drew the conclusion that the cyclical effects of the Nile River flooding kind of allowed people to settle and led to other social or cultural concepts to take place. So you have people now learning how to domesticate cattle because they didn't need to farm or anything. You have people kind of participating in a bartering system with the surplus of crops they produce and other things they were doing around that time. And you kind of see the first or the beginnings of a social hierarchy in ancient Egypt with the farmers and then the traders and then people watching over the farmers and traders and then people watching over the people watching the farmers and traders. And then it's kind of the rudimentary steps of a hierarchy in that sense. And as this population increased and all that good stuff, you kind of get a sense of the first or the beginnings of a pre-modern urbanization. And essentially, urbanization is when people move from a rural area to an urban area, and today I would kind of think of it as people moving from like far outside of cities to cities, and then now it's kind of going from inner cities to suburbs. So that's kind of modern urbanization, but in this sense, it was simply just people moving from the fields where they grew into just settlements because they didn't have cities or anything like that. And with the growth of the population and the growth of the settlements, you kind of see leaders longing for power. It's kind of the first time the warfare went from a means from as a means of protection to a means of kind of just like, hey, we need your land to say we have this land and we're going to conquer you and all that good stuff. So that's kind of just like, I found that interesting because that's kind of what warfare is in today in a sense. It's not really, we never go to war to protect ourselves. It's kind of just like to look big and bad and so people don't attack us or anything like that. So it's kind of, it's extremely similar. And the last point, oh, how do I go back?
Just the arrow, back arrow. Bottom left.
It's
Kinda
not-
see through. So you have 4 arrows there, the one on the right.
Thank you. So the divine right, which is many of us are familiar with. So the notion of kinship somehow spread from a single source in Egypt. In ancient Egypt, a tradition is preserved of the origin of the ruling dynasty and the mythical charter, something I'm going to talk about in a minute. In some cases, the supposed rulers sometimes had miraculous powers. For these Egyptian kings and pharaohs, each have undergone a special ritual, which we're going to talk about. And the royal spouses seldom played ritual roles, but the royal mothers and sisters frequently did. So the tradition that I was referring to says that a single descent line has the sole right to rule. And in this respect, researcher Malinowski says this is the mythical charter. And essentially, the mythical charter is simply an account of the past that serves to justify the present. So all that's saying is, if I were to be the ruler of the dynasty or whatever, it would be because my father was the ruler. So if he did a good job in a ruler, why wouldn't that tradition continue through me? And that's kind of what the charter was with the people. And the miraculous powers that these rulers brought to the people were actually really simple. They basically said that they brought civilization to the people. So essentially the people didn't know how to farm or use fire or domesticate cattle. So when people taught them how to do that, these were miraculous powers that sort of justified why they should be the leader. And the ritual that each ruler went through was called the rite of passage. And this was where the ruler enters on the unique status that sets him apart from all his subjects and endows him with the qualities that he needs to play his role. So I don't know if you guys have seen 300, anyone? The Sparta movie. I mean, it's Sparta, but they went through this process. So before the guy was a ruler and ruled the king, he was a normal citizen or normal peasant or whatever. And his rite of passage was him like going through some 7-foot pool of gold or something. And essentially he emerged like 7 feet tall. His skin was gold and he had all these piercings and he was like a superhuman. So it's said that all of these rulers went through this process, which kind of set them apart from being humans and kind of like gods, which is why people accepted the divine right rule. And with that, it's not that people, the people higher than the peasants, so to speak, kind of made a deal with the ruler in a sense that it was, they kind of said that since we're going to anoint you, since we're going to make you the ruler of our land, we're going to do our job to make sure that people uphold this rule and we're going to make sure that people listen to you. In a sense, it was kind of like a deal, and all that was a part of the rites, the passage, which each ruler went through rather. So now we have an easy clicking question. I don't know if it's going to work right. If you listen to anything I said, or if you just read the thing, you should be able to get this question right.
It's channel 5.
Has everyone entered?
Not yet.
Should I enter?
Yeah, take your free clicker, yeah, that's a good point, yeah, definitely take up your clicker.
Alright, so now has everyone entered? Yes, alright. And I couldn't get the asterisk, but the correct answer is C, so most of you guys were listening, thank you. Oops. So now some discussion questions. Without the use of agriculture, would ancient Egypt have been able to form a state? And I ask this because I feel like the agriculture was kind of the basis of everything else that went going. It kind of led to people needing to learn other things, needing rulers, and all that good stuff. So anyone have any thoughts on that question?
I would say no. Without the flooding of the Nile, being able to, start off all that agriculture, then Egypt really wouldn't have been able to develop as a state. That's my theory.
Did you ever research about how hieroglyphics came about? And if so, wouldn't you have to have that before the forming of like agricultural, because you wouldn't have the communication?
I mean, people need to eat without talking, so I feel like regardless of if I can talk to you, we're gonna figure out how to eat. You know what I mean? So no, I didn't know yet. But yeah, I feel like it still would have happened. Anyone else?
I think building off of Thomas's point, and off just what you have had that you presented, I think it's pretty clear that the whole flooding of the Nile pushed those people together and caused those interactions, and maybe that's what sparked the spoken common language and the agriculture, and that kept moving forward.
Okay, so just, again, to use this as a teaching moment, we wanna make sure in all of our research, our processes that we use to explain why the state formed, that it's what the people are doing in those regions, right? So it's making use of the flooding of the Nile, right? It's capturing the Nile in terms of the irrigation, which is what we talked about, right? So it's not the Nile itself that established ancient Egypt, because we said states aren't things that appear in nature. It's what did our ancient Egyptians do? How did they use the Nile, right, to then build this state?
Yeah. All right. Last question. With such a complex system, referring to ancient Egypt, why do you guys think it's hard for Western thinkers to contribute the foundations of society to ancient Egypt? And that's something we discussed in class a few times.
Yeah, I was gonna say just because, researchers said that it was a black civilization and we, have our racial biases and stereotypes, and we just don't want to admit that we were wrong all this time, or like go back on what we've said for several years.
Also, like, the belief was that, like, it's always come from, grief, all that stuff, and it's just hard to stray away from that, original way of thinking and think something different, I guess.
For sure. Anyone else? Hey.
It's hard, but we're gonna do it anyway.
That's right.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Here are my references. I use Warfare in Ancient Egypt, African Kingdoms, Archaic States in Ancient Egypt, Anatomy of a Civilization, and all of these are in the library. One of them I accessed online. There are a couple you can find online, so if you can't go to the library, try those too. But all of them were helpful, so you guys should use
But
them.
they're all on CourseServe, so
Yeah.
what Malik is saying, they're all on CourseServe, and the library has been trying to put more and more books to have on online access. So make sure you're using the ones on courses, because these are great books to research ancient African states. And, I mean, they're, Lucy Mayer, it's older, use this older language, you're like, nobody says that word anymore, but, it's one of our early examples of really sound